Off to a rocky start. I was muted. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Yeah. So we've aggregated quite a few OGs of the veTokenomics space. That's going to be the topic of discussion today. We'll focus on how it helps protocols kickstart their DeFi flywheels and attract stickier liquidity. But it also we want to touch on how it helps accrue value into the token native to respective protocols. And without further ado, we're gonna get started with Michael from Curve, who is the father of the veTokenomics concept. Hey, Michael, thanks for being here.
Hi.
Yeah, you're as I said, like the person that invented this back in 2019. Can you share a bit about the basic hypothesis and mental models that
actually
got you there?
it was created in 2020 already. So I've programmed that during the time from essentially May till August 2020. But I did have ideas about that before. And basically, it was not so much about economics of it, but more about how to align the actions of voters with the essentially with the good of the protocol. And it was inspired by essentially seeing how it is all broken in the stock markets. So it was quite an interesting time, and I've read some news about how it was all going wrong at Boeing when they created Boeing Max aircraft, and it was experiencing a bunch of accidents because the quality was essentially subpar. And if you dig deeper why it might have happened, actually it looked like Boeing laid off a bunch of good engineers, but that was done because seemingly some shareholders directed a bunch of revenues to stock buybacks while this money were not spent on engineering teams. So a bunch of good people were laid off and quality suffered, but stock nevertheless went up. And after that, some of those shareholders double dipped and by shorting the stock at the top after it was revealed that everything is not going well. So you see, it looked very very bad, but looks like U.S. government essentially bailed Boeing because it was such an important company for all the aerospace sector. But anyhow, looks like something was going on with the stock markets, and mainly because of this, because the incentives were misaligned. So I thought, how to actually align these incentives? Because after all the owners of companies or owners of protocols, they act in self-interest. How to make it so that acting in self-interest is still doing it in the way best for the protocol. So, and I had this idea, like, what if voting power is not just number of tokens or number of shares, but actually that number multiplied by time you are going to hold these tokens. Like you are not, you would not be able to sell these tokens until the end of that time. And essentially, if your tokens or stocks are unlocking tomorrow, maybe your voting power should be near zero. But if you still have a bunch of years to hold, maybe you should have much a much bigger voting power because you are very invested in the protocol, and that's what I implemented in Curve tokenomics and like in veTokenomics. And at the same time, it looked like it's actually nice to integrate with Aragon's standard of that time, mini-me token, which allowed to read balances in the past. So you could have this immovable token, which you get kind of in exchange. When you lock the liquid token, and you could do these heavy calls which do the historical balances only with locked token, but not with the liquid token. So you don't overspend gas by when you are sending the liquid token. So that was also nice. And also much later, it occurred to me that maybe well, there was always a question if a token accrues value in some sense, like be it fees or whatever. Is it a security? Will SEC be happy? And that kind of sort of stuff. And it occurred to me that maybe the immovable VE token, it doesn't matter if it's a security or not. You cannot move it. So that was the idea. So it appeared to be solving multiple problems at once, and that was pretty interesting. But the original motivation was exactly aligning the incentives of protocol owners, essentially, with the best future of the protocol.
Nice. Thank you so much for this detailed context. Alex, Arrow and Velo are the big winners of this cycle, so to say, and those are like both of these projects have had an outstanding success in the DEX space. Do you think like is the deep integration of the token and its incentive alignment part of this success? Like what was the secret sauce, and how did you build on the original VE design?
Yeah. I think just riffing off of what Michael has shared here, it really is about incentive alignment, right? Especially in the DEX landscape, you have a few different stakeholders that you are actively managing, right? You've got traders who fundamentally just want the best execution on their swaps. You've got LPs who fundamentally just want the highest rewards for taking on that risk of LPing. And then you've got token holders who want what is best for the protocol in the long term. And what the VE system really unlocked was the best way to sort of streamline and align the incentives of those three groups in a really powerful way. So, in something like the Uniswap system, the alignment of those three stakeholder groups is actually very, very different, because token holders don't directly benefit from trading fees on the platform. If they were to take a portion of those fees, that might make the LPing experience less competitive. And so the real brilliance, right, of Michael's model was saying, hey, if you come in and you do an essential service for the protocol, right, in voting out of direct emissions, you're both incentivized to use that voting power in the ways that are going to be most productive for the protocol. And your sort of share of that productivity is going to be proportional to the amount of long-term alignment you have. And so I think, in our model, which of course was, originally sort of conceptualized by Andre Crone with Solidly, and this was seen as sort of like an evolution of the VE model and a pulling together of components from Curve, from Convex, from Uni, all into this single streamlined design. But if you do that very, very effectively, if you have voters each week voting to optimize for the productivity of pools, That will ensure the most productive pools are there, so traders will get the best execution. If traders are getting the best execution, LPs are being rewarded, and if LPs are there, then that more value is going to be generated for the longest term stakeholders. And it's one of the most amazing things about the model is the way in which it can be harnessed to align all of these stakeholder groups. And there are some ways, the Solidly model pushed it forward, and we've certainly continued to add to it even since Solidly. But I think if you look across the landscape, I think there's been a lot of conversation about the downsides of the VE model, about other potential emergent models that will solve these problems. But really, I don't think anybody has cracked anything better in terms of aligning stakeholders for the long term and sort of creating that long-term aligned stakeholder group.
I had a question around this for later, but I think the moment is perfect. So Fig, you built Paladin, which is the leading marketplace for voting power. So considering the incentive alignment is such an instrumental component of why this model has proven more potent than other governance or token mechanics that we've seen. Like, is the ability to rent voting power a feature or a bug of the model?
Initially, it was a bug. When it was launched, basically it was
We
funded
don't
by.
hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we hear you now. Did you hear the question? Oh, well, okay. Like, I think all of you probably have probably have a take on this. So let's hear it. Like, do you think the ability to rent voting power in VE systems, is this a bug or a feature, and why? Specifically how it interplays with like incentive alignment.
I'll jump in, and I think it's definitely a feature in the context of DEXs, right? One of the big innovations when veTokenomics and the emissions model was applied to Curve was the idea that now these DEXs, which prior had been limited to just being able to reward LPs with the fees being generated in a sort of fixed time period, now these DEXs can actually be directional, right? So voters in this VE system can actually look proactively and say, hey, there's maybe not enough activity or liquidity on a very important pair to the ecosystem, to a DEX, and they can be directional in voting to direct emissions to bootstrap liquidity on this pool, with an eye towards the fact that if they bootstrap sufficient liquidity on this pool, that will create some broader good, a broader good for the DEX, a broader good for the ecosystem, and things like that. And so that ability to proactively bootstrap through token emissions is like one of the crucial advantages over DEXs that are just constrained by fees alone. And the ability to rent vote power, essentially, I think is critical here, because essentially what you're saying is like, hey, you're a major stakeholder who has gone out and believes in the future of Curve or Aerodrome, and you've locked up a lot of tokens. You've taken on a fair amount of risk in locking up those tokens. And I am a new project or protocol or ecosystem, and I really want to bootstrap enough liquidity on this token. Maybe it's your project's token, maybe it's like a core blue chip pair that the ecosystem really needs. And in order for me to do that, what I'm going to be willing to do is to reward you as the voter, as the person who took this risk on, with incentives, essentially renting your vote power, to bootstrap that liquidity. And I'm not going to ask you to do that out of the kindness of your heart, right? This is raw economic incentives. I'm going to give you a reward such that, you know, I incentivize you to do that sort of job for me. And this is really a win-win, right? Because this allows protocols to build liquidity on their tokens in more capital efficient ways than direct incentives. This allows token lockers to earn even more beyond just fees in terms of like what's coming back to them as an incentive. And it allows that DEX to work in a proactive way to bootstrap liquidity on tokens that are important. So in some ways, you know, it's like you've opened up an entirely new business line for token lockers. And because token locking is at the core of these systems, this is like a very, very good thing for these systems. And it's one of the things that makes these systems better than any sort of fee-based model, better than a sort of traditional Uni V2 style, you know, fee-based DEX model.
I agree that vote incentives are great. I do think they were more than a bug than a feature initially, because they weren't built initially in the VToken model, right? They were pioneered by, at least on Curve, by Andre Conway. We're kind of doing this on Aave and Uniswap. It did not work as well, to be fully transparent. But a lot of philosophy was basically built on the fact that it was interesting because it helped monetize and align holders in a different manner, which meant a whole set of people who weren't ready to lock V tokens at the time suddenly found a way to make this into a revenue sharing opportunity and basically having a new reason to lock it. So it was a bug initially and it became a feature. Now, the Curve's greatest strength and greatest weakness is the fact that it was the first and it was immutable, which means that it had the opportunity to build network effects that no one else will be able to with V tokens. But it also means that it can't change because the behaviors have changed from the time when Curve was launched. And that's, for example, what we're saying with Veldrum, Aerodrum, who fully go into the bribe model, which was not initially planned for when Curve was launched, right? So I think it's a good thing that was done like this. I think it's a terrible thing that the industry has named it bribes because it limits us to just being a small DeFi game instead of onboarding institutionals. Like, there's no way you're going to tell to an institution or a bank or something that they're going to have to bribe for liquidity. It's not fun.
Yeah.
It's just everyone will say no to them.
But hey, IRS recognizes the bribes as revenue, so it's good.
As long as the IRS is happy, we should be happy. We should be safe. I mean, considering like so many decisions in what and how we do it in this space is dictated by like making sure that founders don't land in hot water with regulators. I think, you know, IRS recognizing bribes as revenue is a good signal for us. These, you know, you guys with Mo were basically the first network, at least to my knowledge, to actually like deploy a VE model as a rollup. You know, so if you can share a bit more of like what gave you the confidence to go with that model, which until that point was like really robustly tested in an AMM environment, but there hasn't been too much outside of the DEX space.
Yeah, so Mode has a lot of, I mean, we have a heavy DeFi culture. So when James was building the team out, he brought in a lot of DeFi like-minded people. So a lot of us, especially myself, yeah, we're a child of this kind of Curve evolution and things like that. And so coming from a DAO atmosphere, the time at Olympus DAO where we had to go through a bunch of, you know, folks trying to come in and solicit the treasury and things like that, and then the operational overhead. And then you look at other chains that have to do this with foundations and kind of the bureaucracy that follows because you have a group of humans that are making decisions on where funds flow. So it's a very natural operation. But with Mo, we had the flexibility, of course, because we're a young chain. We could kind of alter different variables very quickly. We didn't build it right out into TGE. I think that would have been very interesting if we planned around that. But you see things like Verichain and things that can do that from the very get-go when we have the gauge system. So I think Mode was interesting because we introduced it after the token launch. But the goals were largely to, you guys covered it beautifully in your tweet that you just sent out before this, was reduce operational overhead and then align existing protocols with incoming protocols. So what happens is you have a ton of these different teams coming in asking for different resources and things like that. And it's tough just because we don't have the manpower or the honest impartiality to bring all these in and allocate those resources. So instilling the gauge system, and then a lot of our protocols are mode holders. And so by plugging them into the gauge, we can say, hey, if a new protocol is coming in, chat with these guys, with the lending market, with the guys at Velodrome, with the guys at Balancer, people who have kind of sway, and see how your protocol fits in. Because in any ecosystem, a new protocol should kind of figure out where it slots in if we're thinking about DeFi Lego pieces. And so this really, it was kind of transformational on the chain side, because then we don't have to, it reduced the overhead by, I don't even know how much. We'd have to ask Fede about that because he was handling a lot of that work. But it was awesome because it took the pressure off of us of playing favorites and just kind of pushing it out into the ecosystem to align incentives, exactly what the VE model was based on. But instead of the DEX level, it's from a protocol coordination level. So yeah, and super proud. I mean, a lot of, it wasn't just conviction, it was a lot of trust and just kind of taking a risk. So from James and our leadership side saying, let's take a risk. And then you guys at Aragon, spending, the resources and the time to push this through. It really took a village to set up the infrastructure. And so would really like to see more chains and stuff explore this model. But so far, yeah, it's been, from an operational standpoint, if you're firing up a chain, you need to coordinate humans or parties that are looking for support. The model, I think, works really beautifully as far as being an anchor organizationally.
Fig, you're currently also in a direction where you're leveraging veTokenomics to like bootstrap liquidity to a network, part of the massive onboarding success in Sonic ecosystem. But you've opted to like give VE power to stablecoin holders and ETH holders that bridge, and like how does that change the dynamic of incentive alignment?
So ring basically gauges are a resource allocation mechanism, right? When we launched rings, the idea was that the incentive alignment that we're seeing for veTokenomics could also be used for stablecoins. There's a huge amount of stablecoins right now on the market. It's only going to keep growing. So the question is, what's your advantage to attract TVL, to keep the TVL, and to offer them the best return on investment? And when you look at the projects who ask themselves these questions, Curve and Velodrome, Aerodrome are kind of the ones who come on top, right? So we started looking into, could we adapt the Velodrome model to stablecoins? And instead of doing this for a DEX, it's basically doing this for a stablecoin. So the interesting idea by doing this is that you're doing three things. The first one is you're aligning long-term liquidity on the chain. Because what happens is that when people lock their liquidity for a better yield, what they actually do is they're actually providing liquidity on stable swaps and on lending markets. The second thing that they do is that they're helping fund the projects on the Sonic ecosystem, because they're not actually getting the yield that's formed by the collateral. What they're doing is they're allocating it to different projects who then themselves drive the VUSD and VE holders. And then the third thing is that everything we've just described is used by having different stablecoins as backing. So right now we have USDC, USDT, Go as backing. We're gonna add a few more. Right now, one of the ones on top of our due diligence list is CRBUSD. And the whole idea is to create a resilient basket of different stablecoins. Now, we do this for three reasons. The first one is we can offer to a lot of these stablecoins distribution on chains where it will be very hard for them to grow. The second thing that we do is we offer chains very high quality liquidity for them to have DeFi empowered on their chain. And then the third thing is that we can rebalance between these different stablecoins and the different protocols we have. We have the collateral on. So today these are Aave, Fluid, Morpho, and we're going to add Deerbox soon. And by doing this, we get the best risk-adjusted yield for stablecoins. So right now, our system is farming around 5.6%, and it's allocating it to the VToken holders. But because not everyone is locking, because people are using them in Sonic DeFi, we're basically getting something like 98% APR on the stablecoins. So that's it. Our biggest risk is basically the investment of the collateral into these different strategies. And we're trying to align all of these different stakeholders to create shelling points that helps the chain run. And I think it's been running relatively well on Sonic.
Yeah, it's in these market conditions, definitely, like I would say Sonic and Bera are like sort of outliers, and it comes as a sort of a validation of the shared thesis here that this model creates better flywheels than what we've seen elsewhere. And speaking of how this model is better, Michael, if you have to design Curve from scratch today, like is there something that you would do differently, and what is it and why?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think so many things are done correctly. I'm still thinking whether the alignment of, in the VE33 model was right. Well, in some sense it is, but on the other sense, what it leads to is voters chasing for very, I would say, short-term things, and with votes jumping around different places, and that, I'm not sure that creates sticky liquidity. It definitely appeals to degens who jump around to maximize the yields, but whether it appeals to more conservative LPs, could, but yeah, it's maybe VE33 is kind of needs to be looked at a little bit more to so I guess there are pros and cons of that approach. But another thing which I probably would do differently is about gauges. By the way, do you know where the name gauge came from? It's actually not something which it's really a name which I coined because I worked in a physics lab, and gauges are just devices which measure things, like pressure gauge, temperature gauge, whatever, and it was basically applied to vacuum systems and something. But anyway, here gauges measure how long and how much liquidity is everyone holding. And they could potentially be volume gauges, right? So they could measure trading volume and incentivize volume, however evil that may sound. So that's possible in principle. It just doesn't look very good, I guess. But anyway, I would probably look at gauges, and what I would do differently. And it actually can be done differently today. They can be modified even in a curve. I would probably do something like giving a real yield only to those people who did not stake, and giving token yield only to those people who did stake. So it would be like switching between what you want to earn in the pool. Do you want real yield, which compounds, or do you want to earn tokens? And that would probably feel a little bit similar to switching what you earn on Convex. Because on Convex, you can switch whether you want to earn stable coins or you want to earn CRV, CVX, and so on. So I would do that with gauges. When you, let's say, provide liquidity in stable coins, why wouldn't you, let's say, take all the profit and direct it, well, profit minus admin fee maybe, to all of those who did not stake, and all of those who did stake don't get any fee profit, but they get tokens. So because they're after tokens after all, and then if you are not after tokens, well, you are getting your stable coins, so you probably should be happy with that. No token dumping. But if you were to earn tokens, maybe you wanted to earn tokens because you wanted to hold them for a longer time or to use them for their utilities. So maybe you wouldn't be selling those tokens, and that kind of creates a little bit better alignment with of liquidity providers with what they want to do with the token. So that is something I probably would look into.
I think there's now that we're 4 almost 5 years into gauges since Curve basically started the trend. There's also some global trends we're starting to see about different changes that have been put on. So we can talk about the solidly model, but something we've been seeing that has been kind of playing against us, to be honest, is we've been seeing a lot of internalization in vote marketplaces. Now, Velodrome and Aerodrome, solidly in general, were the ones who started this, were basically they inserted the vote incentive marketplace directly on their platform. So if you look on Curve and even on Bouncer, you have different actors like ourselves who are competing for each other to get the projects to do vote incentives on this platform. This is not the case on most of the projects we're starting to see. The latest one that's not even really a V token, but Liquidity with their V2 also has their internalized marketplace, right? I think it comes from the fact that all of this optimization that we're seeing with V tokens is basically optimization around making the system more efficient and better at leaking less value. So it's the point that Michael just made, right? How do you optimize for more people to get better yield and yield that's more aligned to what they want? So vote marketplace ourselves, like ourselves, we take a fee. We're not always 100% aligned with the protocol themselves because we're aligned to our own interest, which is normal. So basically the only thing is either you have a pure ally that only does your protocol, or you want to do it yourself, right? That's kind of what we're starting to see. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, even if I think that it's very, very hard to iterate correctly on the vote incentive marketplace. But the problem I'm seeing with this is vote incentives are very intensive in terms of BD. The Velodrome team basically pushes their list of people that they think can bribe on a weekly basis. We do the same. All of our competitors do the same. And Curve doesn't have to do it as much because they have all of this ecosystem of people who are doing it for them around them, right? The reason why I think all of this is very important is that there's all of these trends that we're starting to see happening, but people don't always have the right context to know why this is happening. So for example, right now we have a discussion with Curve and Aerodrome and Mode, but these projects are outliers. They're the most successful V-token gauges. It's not like no one else has done it. Otherwise, there's dozens and dozens of other projects who've tried V-token and who failed. So why did Curve, why did Aerodrome, why did the Mode succeed where others didn't? That's kind of, I think, the questions that enable us to know what is the next new features that have to be added on this system. Personally, I think I don't think it's necessarily a mistake, but it's something we realize this time, is that V-token systems that we have seen up until now are very high emission projects. The problem with very high emission projects is that either you're able to match emissions with buying pressure, or the selling pressure is going to overtake and you're going to have a trend that's very negative for the project, at least for its price action. We kind of took this at heart and we have no emissions right now. We're basically only doing gauges with resources that are farmed by the protocol. So it's less viral, it leads to less speculation by itself, but it's also much more long-term in the sense that we don't have to worry about emissions creating sell pressure. So I think V-tokens are an interesting alchemy between a lot of different features that are revenue sharing, that are emissions, etc., and an alignment between all the different stakeholders that that want to lead to the point of alignment from every stakeholder. The problem that we're seeing is that it only works if revenue becomes as good as emissions. And while Curve and Aerodrome are getting there, I think most projects will never get there. So that's where I want to say that projects have to be very careful when they're using V tokens, because the token will not save your project. It will make it better if it's already good.
Yeah, I just want to hear Michael and Alex's take on why they succeeded where many others have failed, because I think it's a very good question to answer, considering we can drink from the source here.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think probably probably the answer is in fundamental value. So what you well, VE model, it allows you to very efficiently align people with the system. It maybe better allocates resources, but you need the fundamental value to happen. If you just do VE token model with nothing, then it will not work. It's not a band-aid which fixes everything magically. So you need some fundamental source of revenue, right? So that's one thing. And what Curve did well, I guess it was important niche in the market at the right time. And I guess what Velodrome probably did well, they did some very, very incredible BD with Coinbase. So it's not like just a token model here. And not just revenues, which are definitely happening there. It's also alignment of everything with some very amazing BD effort. And you can see that if you look at the difference between success of Aerodrome and Velodrome, which is kind of exactly the same model, but the results seem to be different. So I would say that Aerodrome is probably the first hybrid of fully decentralized system and a very active BD measures, which are integrated with this decentralized system. And that's fairly fascinating. On Curve, it's a little bit more like what happens if you launch something which is very much needed and which is bringing value back to the system via fees, bringing it very well. How does it run in a fully decentralized way? So a bunch of actors like Convex and YEarn and the StakeDAO appeared, competing with each other, and maybe a bunch of other projects which build on top, and that created kind of self-coordinated network effects. But yeah, while VE model is coordination, you still need some fundamental monetary value to be happening. And also, I believe that this value should be, in the long term, it should be sustainable. Like it should be, if the system can survive when the incentives are smaller than the fundamental value you generate. If you can survive in that regime, then maybe it's probably going to do very well early on as well when incentives are bigger than the fundamental value you are generating. But you need to, let's say, you need to create a system which is working like longer down the line when incentives are not that large anymore, and your fundamental value at that time should be big enough. So you have this time for the system to grow and to be bootstrapped. But I think the eventual success depends on whether the value is sustainable eventually. So, and I guess with with multiple other projects, it kind of remains to be seen. But VE model allows for very, very good bootstrapping. But whether that all will be successful eventually is something which depends on on the core value of the system being built.
Alex, what's your take? Why are Velo and Iro so successful where others have failed?
Yeah, I think it was actually Token Bryce who coined a phrase that I think is actually super helpful here, and that he described, the difference, the evolution of the sort of MetaDex model, from the origin of Curve and other sort of forks of Solidly, even as subtle nuances with great consequences. And I do think it's something that we sometimes minimize in the space, is where, if we think about the global economy, right? Whether or not the Federal Reserve of the United States is increasing or decreasing interest rates at tiny bips, right, has massive downstream consequences. These are relatively small nuances in monetary policy, and yet it can make all the difference as to whether things are going very well in certain sectors, in certain portions of the world, or things are not doing very well. And so when we think about the economic systems that these VE models create, there is like this shared foundation amongst them, right, of this basic ideas that we've been discussing, and stakeholder alignment and some of the mechanisms to create it. But differences like, whether or not 100% of the fees go back to the token versus 50%. Nuances like whether you socialize all of the collective rewards, in that like everyone gets an even cut, whether or not they're voting for productive pools or non-productive, are massively consequential. And then even if you go beyond like drawing distinctions between MetaDex and Curve, and you just look at evolutions of the Solidly model, people played with making major adjustments. I mean, they looked small on the surface. Adjustments to our emissions schedule, adjustments to immutability, adjustments to how LPs are rewarded, adjustments to fee distribution. And anytime you go and play with those mechanisms, and you do something that extends from something that's sort of been proven, tried and true, to something that is like totally untested, you are fundamentally changing the economics of the model in substantial ways. And so, what I attribute the like success of Velodrome and Aerodrome to is that, by virtue of our proximity to the launch of Solidly, right, and a bunch of us were members of a sub DAO of Solidly, and we watched its initial performance, right? We looked at the design of the emissions schedule. We looked at things like the initial bribe market mechanisms, and we looked at all of this, and we saw that on a principle level, it was like spot on. But there were some of these executional pieces that we believed could have been a bit more optimal. And we, took both a tech and an economic look at it, and then made the adjustments we made because we thought that they were the optimal ones. And I think, with any sort of success, it's preparation and luck. You have to choose the right parameters. You have to go into the right market, and you have to execute on it. And that is part of it. But if you choose the wrong parameters, right, that can be game, set, and match. And I think that is one thing that there's probably just not enough credit, given generally in the space, that it may look like a small difference, but in the end, it's as consequential as, when you're setting broad financial or monetary policy, that these can be make or break decisions that have numerous downstream effects. And so, what we've basically seen is that, Aerodrome has obviously been completely dominant on base. And, I think its size relative to Velodrome is really just a reflection of the fact that Base has grown much faster. But even Velodrome is the largest X on nearly every chain on which it is competing. So it's basically winning in every market that it's competing, which I think goes back to the power of those design decisions, of the technology decisions, and ensuring that, where you were making changes over what worked, you were like really making sure that these subtle nuances, these adjustments, would be the things that would have great consequences. And I think where you've seen so many failures is, folks got cute with the model, and they didn't really think through or model through what the impact of getting cute with a particular thing was. And in the end, it fundamentally breaks it.
Yeah, I think it's like butterfly effects in this space are pretty strong, and this is, I would say, maybe one of the one of the reasons we haven't seen, at least from what the project we've spoken with, like one of the reasons we haven't seen that many VE projects has been literally like your sole option of building VE for a long time was like, I'm gonna just take a project, fork their code base, and start making changes, and like you change something, but you have no idea what the trickle down effects are, because that component of the code base is not specifically built to be changed, right? Or they're like second degree economic effects that follow that change. So I mean, this is something that we're trying to alleviate on our side, specifically on the on the code base. But I would love to hear your takes on like we sort of have an agreement that this model works better than like other token-based models, whether we call them tokenomics, whether we call them governance, like involving the token in a meaningful way into a protocol. And considering it's better, like what are some of the hurdles or some of the catalysts that you see that have either slowed its adoption, or if it's a hurdle or if it's a catalyst of like what will unlock the propagation of this model? And let's start with you, and then everyone else can jump in as well.
Yeah, well, I think, from Aragon's standpoint and a chain standpoint, the target market's very different. So it would be approaching these different chains and organizations, and then it's all about alleviating pain. So diving in and seeing what their overhead is in their ecosystem as far as allocating resources and building their ecosystem out with teams full of humans, right? That have that time and an attention economy. So I think part of it is the BD effort, just spreading the word that there's a different way to do it and alleviate pain. And then you had a question here that I can touch on here is, I think if we can deliver AI tooling on top of that, so V gauge holders or V token holders can just kind of set and forget their gauge based on what they want to do as far as participating in the ecosystem, whether that's collecting the highest amount of bribes, or whether that is saying, I want to track how active teams are, because we know in ecosystems, a lot of teams, they fall off, they come in, we got new teams coming in, we have new teams launching totally different products at the same team. You have, God forbid, exploits. There's just ecosystems and chains are very fluid places. And so with AI, you can set parameters, and I shout out to the Codex team, which are kind of pioneering like goal setting for these agents. You can have goals that say, hey, I want to track a team's activity. I want to track a team's on-chain activity, off-chain activity. And that's how I personally would do it. If I had a set and forget gauge in an ecosystem, is I want my votes to go towards teams that are actively building, because at least at the moment, we still have teams that are humans that are under, high stress environments in the crypto space. And we see these bursts of energy that come in and deliver products and ship, but then we see maybe dormancy for a while, which I think the industry is kind of grappling with. You see this interesting churn, and so yeah, I think to scale it would be alleviating pain, and then delivering an AI suite that shows that you can really set and forget, and your alignment can be as fluid as what you set up as a parameter that you have values for. But yeah, that would be my take on scaling this particularly for ecosystems.
Anyone else has a hot take on catalysts to propagate this model?
Well, maybe one good thing is understanding of whether VE model is economically better than I don't know, token burn, for example, right? Because like how it works, you essentially have fees go into those people who lock tokens, and they are incentivized to lock because they are receiving fees or receiving vote incentives or whatever, right? So we did some interesting research. We calculated how much tokens would have been removed from circulation if instead of directing all the fees and vote incentives to voters, it would be going to essentially buy the token from the market and have it burned. And guess what? The amount of token removed from circulation, if it was token burn, would have been 3 times smaller than the amount of VE tokens which got locked. So it appears that VE token model so far worked more efficiently than token burns in removing tokens from circulation, and that's something which the broad public doesn't understand. For example, token burns, they are a very good meme, right? So they resonate really a lot with a bunch of people. But actually, VE token model is much better, and I think that's something which needs to be conveyed to the people.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest headwinds for the model generally is that we just don't have very good standardized ways for evaluating the tokens of different projects. And, this is definitely one of my biggest bugaboos. And, my first entry to DeFi was Curve, Convex, and all this sort of stuff because I loved the models, right? And I loved that there was fundamental factors, that there was real value being redistributed, rewarding participation, and all that sort of stuff. But one of the biggest headwinds is that I think people fundamentally misunderstand the concept of emissions, and they really don't know how to compare emissions-based models to what the market generally considers to be "quote unquote" not emissions-based models. Not inflating type models. But if we are really honest as an industry, almost every single token has emissions. But it's a different form of emissions, and they're what I call privatized emissions. They are emissions of the token, generally to insiders, teams, investors, things like that. They get unlocked, quote unquote, emitted into circulating supply over time, and that dilutes liquid token holders. And that is a form of incentives. You're just incentivizing, however, different stakeholder groups. You're incentivizing teams, you're incentivizing investors, and things like that. And when you think about token unlocks as emissions, because again, from the standpoint of a liquid token holder or an LP, the functional mechanism is the same, and that you're being diluted or they're dumping into your liquidity. If you think about that as a cost, then like the revenue to emissions ratio on most of these tokens is infinite. It's literally infinity because no value goes back to that token at all. These are functionally meme tokens with promises of future utility. Maybe there's some sort of buyback mechanism or things like that. But on most tokens, the ratio is infinite. And yet, the market, I think, has generally looked at tokens like, MetaDex tokens, Velodrome, Aerodrome, Curve, that might be like emitting 1.2x revenue, right? And they say, this is worse, this is unsustainable, but they will eat $1 billion in unlocks with zero value accrual back. And you'll never see a headline think piece talking about, oh my gosh, is Uniswap sustainable? You will only see that if the emissions are essentially public. And so we've been doing a lot of work here trying to reframe this, because fundamentally what we see emissions as is constructive dilution. And what constructive dilution is doing is it is rewarding those who are actively participating in the system by diluting those who are less actively participating. And if you think about the broad strokes of this, that is what you want. If these things will be sustainable, you want to reward people who are providing more with more of an active share of that thing. This is a positive thing. This is like, this isn't saying, hey, if you were the OG team there day one, or if you got into that early investment round, you're getting these rewards and you're diluting other people because you were there early. This is turning that on its head, and it's saying there was no benefit to necessarily to being early. And if you're not showing up and continuing to add value to the system, your share of that system will be diluted. And that's how you create these like infinite games. But I think like the moment is really, I think, coming around to this, being out at DOS. Every single fund out there is talking about, we're done with the meme games. And yes, we are counting many of the governance tokens that we have traditionally invested in as memes, because fundamentally, what do we own? We own the right to maybe sue a multi-sig of 5 or 6 people if they go rogue and they don't give us the treasury when we come asking for it, right? That's not really a very interesting, like, investable idea. Tokens that have actual utility, it's useful for something, right? Tokens that what it's useful for is incentivized through the value that the DEX creates. That value, that utility is enforced by immutable code, that you're not trusting a multi-sig or not even trusting necessarily like a DAO, that there's no trust here, that you just sort of know if you own 10% of the voting power, you're going to direct 10% of the emissions, you're going to be able to take back 10% of the value created. That is what people are looking for, and that people know that they have been burned by privatized emissions. And I think we're ready for an inflection point, and I think it's going to be very, very good for all of those of us in the space who have, I think, been building systems like these in a principled way, believing it was the right thing to do, even as these speculative cycles have been willing to bid up tokens that do nothing, that return nothing, that are essentially, like team and insider exit event sort of tokens. Like, if the only utility of the tokens to be sold, guess what? It's going to be sold. So I'm hoping we have a turnaround here, because emissions are not a bad thing, especially not if we're playing infinite games here. Dilution is not a bad thing, as long as you are using it to reward the behaviors that support the overarching system. And this is a mental model shift. And it is going to require better tools to normalize things. I do think if you're going to go to Token Terminal and you're going to see, net earnings on Curve or Velodrome or Aerodrome as negative earnings, you have to put a giant negative infinite earnings bar on every token that's unlocked 500 million in the last year and has returned no value, because otherwise, we're just penalizing the systems that are actually doing this as a public good. And yeah, we continue to do some of that work, but that's my conviction. And, I will go down with the ship on conviction here that what these systems enable us to do is build far better systems, not just recreate like the mistakes of the traditional models.
I don't necessarily agree with all of this. I agree with a big part of it. My biggest concern is that we've been heralding tokens as better than an equity because they could have programmatic utility. Sure, that's true for all of the tokens here and a lot more. The problem is an equity is legal liability over a company. Today, most tokens are not legal or programmatic liability over a protocol. And that's the whole thing. Like, we actually have to enforce a lot more utility than what we are today. There needs to be framework that are a lot clearer, because the value of equity in the US, for example, is the security of investor. It's the fact that they know they have a lot of guarantees behind what they're actually doing in their protocol. So I'm not saying emissions are bad. I think that emissions are a budget. They're basically marketing or growth spend. Like, a lot of startups will use their money differently. The good thing is that if you start with a high valuation, means that you have a very big budget. But in the end, people are going to take that budget, they're going to spend it, and they're going to sell it. So it's going to push the price down. And the only way for the price to go back up is either having fundamentals or building a strong narrative. So in the end, it's always the same equation. How do you create more buy pressure than sell pressure? And when you're doing emissions, or when you're doing unlocks, it's all the same thing in the end. It's just additional supply that you have used to get to somewhere. So sure, I think we can say that it's not fair that projects who are using their logs are not counting it as expenses. You're right. But in the same sense, it's the same for emissions, it's the same for everything. In the end, these protocols were in finance, they're here to build, to make money, and either they're making money or they're not making money.
Well, and who's making money? Like, you know, most projects will have had billions of dollars in unlocks, and not a single dime will have ever gone in any way to the token holders. Some of it will go directly, in fact, to other private entities. I mean, what the lack of stakeholder alignment has done in the Uniswap system has basically said, we're going to unlock billions of dollars of uni tokens, and the first time we add an additional revenue stream, it's not even going to the DAO. It's not going to the token. It's going to go to a private entity in labs. And so, like, I think that I agree with you. More utility, absolutely. Make that utility enforced immutably. But in the end, like, everything, if we're actually building better systems, everything should go to the token. And any participant in that system, DAO, team, labs, if they want a piece of it, their path to a piece of it is not selling their token, and it is not carving off permissioned revenue streams for themselves. They are an equal participant as everybody else using the token to participate and be rewarded for that participation. And that is so far from what we've been doing in the space, and we continue to do, and we excuse, I think, just an unbelievable amount of bad behavior on the basis of this. But I mean, that is a better future. All the utility is wrapped around the token. Every token is maximally useful. Every participant in the system is equal. They use the token to access it. They are rewarded equal to anybody else. And like, that's the future that I think like the tech unlocks for us if we move towards it. And I do think the zeitgeist is shifting in such a way that people who do things like that will be rewarded. Like, very much like you mentioned earlier, the way in which metadexes have internalized more value, right? Rather than there being a liquid locker and a vote optimizer on top of it that are taking a degree of, their rent seeking as part of that, build it all into the core layer. You could do this for many other things. You could do this for additional product extensions, as like Michael and Curve have done, with borrowing and lending. You could do this by bringing things like auto compounders internal, charging less of a rate. In fact, if you were to add a front end fee into the MetaDex model, that front end fee doesn't go to a private entity. That front end fee goes right back to the token, right? That's the way in which I think we should be doing this. Like every token should be maximally useful. That usefulness should be enforced by immutable code. And then we have something better than it is laws and a judicial system and your ability to hire lawyers to enforce your rights and inequity. You can just look at the code and you know what you're entitled to.
Yeah, it's I think more reliance on you know, like dry law as opposed dry code instead of wet code is ultimately where we're trying to get. We're slightly over time, but I just want to give all of you a chance to give a closing advice that you have for a founder exploring veTokenomics for their project. If you have like some words of encouragement or advice or pitfalls to look for, now's the time to share it.
Well, I guess the most important one is to have fundamental value connected to the value of token lockers, I guess, and that I think it's important to get this connection done as quickly as possible, or maybe from the very beginning of the system. Because if you launch the token and wait and don't get this value connected from the very start, you may experience problems with inflation and inflation affecting the price and so on. But if you fully connect the loop from the very beginning, then the system will likely find something close to a fair value fairly quickly. And I think this is very important to do as quickly as possible in the new system. Another one is, I guess, another one is probably probably about how much tokens are locked, VE locked initially. It's probably not good to have a bunch of supply up from the very beginning and locked like from the very beginning, because you kind of want the market to discover who the participants of your governance are. And if you force people to lock a bunch at the very beginning, you are kind of abandoning this discovery of what your governance will be. So you have kind of a pre-selected governance in some sense if you force a bunch of people to lock. And also, probably more importantly, they dilute voting power and dilute the fee earning power of new voters or new lockers. And that is that probably also affects the bootstrapping. If you start from very small number of VE locked tokens, I think bootstrapping goes much better.
Alex, what's your advice?
Yeah, I think just riffing off the conversation was having prior, totally agree with Michael. Like, you got to go all in on utility from the very beginning. There needs to be real sort of value flowing. There needs to be real immutable utility. But the one step beyond that is that I think if you're going to launch a protocol and you're going to say this token is going to be maximally useful, you should bet on that yourself in the form of the team. I think all of your tokens should be locked, and that your bet should be on the utility. And so that would be like my big advice, like for teams. Like, it's a terrifying thing, right? In our case, like, we didn't raise any money. It's a terrifying thing to not allocate liquid tokens to the team, right? Whereby they'll eventually be able to exit. It's terrifying to bet entirely on this locked token is going to be useful. It's by virtue of our participation equal, we will be able to be rewarded. But it is like the kind of bet that really aligns your incentives. I think really helps the community and broader market to feel like they can be an equal participant to the team. And I think that is something I would definitely share is like take the big risk, you know, bet on the utility. You're telling everybody else is so powerful.
Thank you. And these, you have the final word.
Yeah, well, I mean, just do it, take risks, and then experiment. I mean, we have incredible pioneers on stage. It's kind of surreal having this group together. All just legends in the model and implementing it, and they're all live, and the docs are live, and it's all working in real time. So if you're a new team that's coming in and wants to do this, like Alex said, there's a lot of parameters you can tweak, so be careful of that. But then, as Michael said, it's all about everyone. Tie utility up to it, bet on yourselves, but really look at the building blocks of it, I would say, and parse it out and see which ones might work for your protocol, your use case, your chain, whatever. Because there are a lot of parameters, right? There's locking mechanics, there's time mechanics, there's emission mechanics, there's how much in the beginning versus how much at the end. There's so many different ways to tweak, and I would just encourage, I mean, we're all working in DeFi, I hope, I mean, most, to push the needle and drive the industry forward. So instead of just, copy pasting whatever you see, I would encourage some experimentation. It might be scary and people might fail, but as an industry, that's how we move forward. So we've seen, it looks like 4 generations on this very stage who've tackled that principle and ingested. So I hope we see many more to come.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining me for this conversation. It was amazing to share the stage with you guys. And see you on chain. Take care.